Hello, this is Rabbi Abramson. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Vayyiggash. It is the culmination of the dramatic story of Joseph and his brothers. This story, which reaches its climax in this week's Torah portion, is one of the most dramatic in all of the Bible. It's a complex story of favoritism, jealousy, anger, betrayal, testing, struggle, and finally, reconciliation. This story began many chapters earlier in Genesis when we read of childhood jealousy, Joseph's brothers' hatred of him that was so great that they desired to kill Joseph, their ultimately selling Joseph into slavery in Egypt, and the tragic, hurtful lie that they told their father to explain Joseph's disappearance. And now in this week's Torah portion, we see Joseph 20 years older, now elevated to a position of great power in Pharaoh's court. Due to a famine in Canaan, Joseph's brothers have come down to Egypt to buy food, which, thanks to Joseph's planning, is abundantly available in Egypt. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. He looks different, he's dressed differently, he's speaking the Egyptian language, and so on. Joseph is now 39 or so years old. It's more than 20 years since his brothers had last seen him. Imagine what Joseph must feel when he finds himself in a position of power over his brothers who had hated and hurt him so long ago. Despite the passage of over 20 years, despite Joseph's current exalted position in Egypt, the reunion with his brothers must have reopened the wounds which had been inflicted upon him. Certainly a desire for revenge, coupled with his ambivalence over the fact that, after all, they are his brothers, provides a tortuous internal struggle for Joseph. So here's a summary of the events that lead up to the climax. Joseph accuses his brothers. Again, he knows that they are his brothers. They don't know that the Egyptian viceroy is their young brother. Joseph initially accuses his brothers of being spies. The brothers defend themselves, and they mention their youngest brother, that's Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, and Joseph's only full brother. They mention the younger brother who is back in Canaan. So Joseph demands that Benjamin be brought down to Egypt, and he retains his other brother Shimon in prison. Well, the brothers return to Canaan, and they subsequently come back down to Egypt with Benjamin. Joseph sees his now contrite brothers and his beloved younger brother, and he is overcome with emotion. He entertains his guests in fine style. However, his lingering pain and ambivalence are not all gone. Joseph has their sacks filled with corn, and he has his silver dining goblet hidden in Benjamin's sack. After the brothers leave, Joseph overtakes them, accuses them of theft, and finds his goblet in Benjamin's sack. The still anonymous Egyptian viceroy now prepares to keep Benjamin imprisoned. And now Judah, the oldest brother, begins to plead with Joseph not to keep Benjamin. Judah eloquently appeals to Joseph's compassion as a man, as a brother, as a father. And finally, Joseph can contain himself no longer, and at long last he identifies himself to his brothers. Ani Yosef, he says to them, I am Joseph. Ha'od Avichai, is my father still alive? Subsequently, Joseph forgives his brothers for what they did to him so long ago. He tells them to return to Canaan, to tell their father that his son Joseph is alive and now powerful in Egypt, to bring Jacob and their families back down to Egypt, and now to live under Joseph's sponsorship and protection in the area of Egypt known as Goshen. And with this, the drama of Joseph and his brothers has come full circle. Their reconciliation is complete. The story itself is high drama. We can imagine few plays in classical or modern theater which are as intense, as rich in emotional color. But if you think the pshat, the simple literal meaning of the story, provides enough drama, let's take a look at the midrashic account. It is wild. Midrash, that large body of rabbinic legends, adds multiple levels of meaning to the biblical text. I often like to assert you don't need to take Midrash literally in order to take it seriously. The Midrashic authors probably didn't consider all of their embellishments of biblical narratives to be literally true, and certainly we need not be concerned about the question of whether these or those details of the story actually occurred. Nevertheless, let's enter the world of Midrash and see where it takes us in this story. According to the thrust of many of the Midrashim connected to the story of Joseph and his brothers, it was not only Judah's appeal to Joseph's compassion and pity that prompted Joseph to forgive his brothers. Judah's confrontation with his brother is also seen as a duel of words, a great power struggle between these two brothers. So let's see how Midrashic literature presents the confrontation between Judah and Joseph. Judah first tries a legal argument, accusing Joseph of violating the law. Under the law, he says, a thief must pay double the value of the stolen property and may be taken as a slave only if he is unable to pay. Even if Benjamin had been guilty of theft, Judah insists, Benjamin has the money to pay the compensation and therefore has been wrongly incarcerated. So that's Judah's legal argument, namely the notion that it is a violation of Egyptian law for Joseph to have imprisoned Benjamin. Judah then tries a subtle threat, pointing out that many years before, the land of Egypt had been stricken with plagues when Benjamin's grandmother, that's Rebekah, Isaac's wife, when Rebekah had been detained by Pharaoh for as little as one night. You may recall that story from a few Torah portions ago. If Rebekah's detention for one night had caused such problems for Egypt, imagine the problems that Benjamin's extended incarceration would cause. So that's Judah's perhaps not so subtle threat. Finally, Judah lays the foundation for the real power struggle between himself and the Egyptian governor. In this country, he says, Pharaoh is first and you are second. In my country, my father is first and I am second. If you do not give in to my demand and release my brother, I will kill you. Now, Joseph is not about to let this tough talk go unchallenged. On his signal, his son Manasseh stamps his foot so hard that the palace shakes. Only a member of our family can do something that powerful, Judah thinks. Judah's brothers stay out of the confrontation at this point. They tell themselves, kings are carrying out a dispute, we'd better not get involved. The angels descend from heaven in order to watch the grand battle between Joseph the bull and Judah the lion. From the beginning, you've been playing games with us, Judah asserts. People from many other nations have come down to Egypt seeking to buy food. You didn't ask them all kinds of questions about their families. We didn't come seeking your daughter in marriage. Are you interested in some sort of alliance with our sister? You've got a big mouth, Joseph retorts. Are any of your other brothers so bold? None of my brothers has as much at stake as I do in the event that Benjamin doesn't return to his father. Judah answers, I offered myself as security to my father. I took personal responsibility for his safe return. And Joseph asks, so why didn't you take personal responsibility for your other brother, whom you sold for 20 pieces of silver? You didn't seem to have much regard for the pain you were causing your father then, when you told him that a beast had devoured your brother. So now you can just go and tell your father that the rope has followed the water bucket. These words so upset Judah that he lets out a great cry, which is heard as far away as Canaan. Hushim, the son of Dan, one of Joseph's other brothers. So Hushim is Joseph's nephew. Hushim hears the cry and jumps down to Egypt in one leap. He joins Judah in his wail of protest. The cry of the two is now so loud that Joseph's valiant men lose their teeth. The great cities of Pitom and Ramses are destroyed, and they will remain in ruins until years later the enslaved Israelites will rebuild them. Judah's brothers now join in. They start stamping their feet so hard that in moments the ground looks as though it had been torn up by a plowshare. The taunting continues. If I unsheath my sword, Judah says, I'll fill Egypt with corpses. If you unsheath your sword, Joseph responds, I'll wrap it around your neck. You lied to us, Judah insists, referring to Joseph's earlier reassurances. Lies are fitting for liars, Joseph answers. There is no greater lie than the one you told your father when you sold your brother. If you don't release Benjamin, Judah continues, I'll dye the markets of Egypt with blood. Well, you come by it naturally, Joseph responds. You dyed your brother's coat with blood and told your father that he had been killed by wild beasts. Judah's rage continues to build. His right eye sheds tears of blood. The hair on his chest becomes so stiff that it pierces the 5 garments that he is wearing. Judah takes brass rods, bites them with his teeth, and chews them into powder. Joseph, in response, kicks the marble pedestal he is seated on, and it shatters. Judah thinks, this man is my equal. He tries to pull his sword out of its sheath, but it refuses to budge. Judah knows from this sign that his adversary is a God-fearing man. On his father's command, on Joseph's command, Manasseh gathers a great army, 500 mounted soldiers and 10,000 foot soldiers. Judah's brothers are afraid, but he challenges them. Why are you terrified, since God grants us great mercy? Judah the lion roars again. City walls in Egypt and Goshen fall. Pregnant women give birth prematurely. Pharaoh is flung from his throne. Pharaoh sends word to Joseph that since Egypt is in danger of destruction, he'd better give in to the demand of the Hebrews. Joseph then speaks gently to Benjamin, asking him to swear that he didn't steal the silver goblet. I swear that I did not touch the goblet, Benjamin says, as surely as my brother Joseph is separated from me, as surely as I had nothing to do with the darts my brothers threw at him, as surely as I was not one of those who took off his coat of many colors, as surely as I had nothing to do with the transaction with the Ishmaelites, as surely as I did not dip his coat in the blood. Joseph asks, how can I know that this oath which you have taken upon your brother's fate is true? Benjamin replies, by the name of my 10 sons, whom I gave in memory of my brother's life and trials, you can see how dearly I loved him. Hearing these words of love from his brother Benjamin, Joseph can control himself no longer. He makes himself known to his brothers, but he still can't do it directly. Are you sure that your brother is dead? Joseph asks all his brothers. Yes, they respond. Your brother is not dead, Joseph responds. You sold him, and I bought him. And then he starts to call out, Yosef ben Yaakov, bo etzli. Joseph, the son of Jacob, come here. Yosef ben Yaakov, bo etzli v'daber im achecha shemacharucha. Joseph, son of Jacob, come here and speak with your brothers who sold you. The brothers start looking around. Why are you looking around? Joseph asked them. Ani Yosef achichem. I am Joseph, your brother. The brothers are momentarily dumbfounded, but soon the reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers is complete. Now, what is this all about? As I said before, the pshat of the story, the literal details of the biblical narrative itself, are dramatic enough. Why did the Midrashic authors provide such a fanciful interpretation of Judah's speech? In the biblical account, Judah pleads and cajoles, appealing to Joseph's sense of compassion. He barely hints at the injustice which his brothers are now experiencing, and he is hardly impertinent. In the Midrashic account, however, Judah is aggressive and arrogant and threatening. But the more enraged he becomes, the more he threatens, the more Joseph wounds him, mocking him with references to the crime that Judah and his brothers had committed 20 years before. The Joseph of the Midrashic account is, I think, the personification of Judah's conscience. The more Judah protests his unjust treatment, the more his guilty conscience reminds him of the injustices that he and his brothers had committed. Judah screams and yells, trying to drown out the voice of conscience which taunts him, but to no avail. Only when Judah listens to his conscience, accepts responsibility for his sin, and pleads to Joseph to imprison him rather than Benjamin, only then does Joseph reveal himself to his brothers and end the struggle. The point of the Midrash in this view is a lesson about morality, about accepting responsibility, about listening to our consciences even when we'd rather drown them out. But this interpretation is, in a sense, based on a Midrashic understanding of the Midrash, which sees Joseph in the story as the personification of Judah's conscience. But what does the story mean if we read the Midrash more or less literally, if we see Joseph as Joseph? Why did Joseph feel the need to engage in this ferocious struggle with his brother? Remember that despite the passage of time, despite all the changes in Joseph's life, he has now confronted the brothers who tortured him, who separated him from his father, and who sold him into slavery. Now he is the one in power, and it is important for him to communicate to them, to really communicate to them, the magnitude of their sins. The power struggle between Joseph and Judah, seen in this light, is Joseph's way of exorcising the anger which had stayed in him all these years. Is Joseph's manipulative and, frankly, dishonest behavior justified? It's hard for us to judge. Is Joseph's behavior understandable? Certainly. In one sense, the subterfuge is partly due to Joseph's anger, which prevents him from being honest with his brothers from the start. In another sense, it facilitates a confrontation which is in consonance with the admonition that we read in Leviticus chapter 19. Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. Hocheach tochiach et amitecha, rather you shall surely rebuke your fellow. Velo tisa alav chet, and not bear sin because of him. In other words, if you have a valid complaint about a person, find a suitable way to communicate it rather than hating that person in your heart and bearing the sin of grudge bearing because of your silence. And this is important advice for us as well. How many relationships do we know which have been damaged not so much by the things that are said as by the things that are not said? By the silence, which sometimes allow our anger to fester and to grow within us. Sometimes it's better to get what's bothering us off our chests so that we can clear the air and move on. The story of Joseph and his brothers is a fascinating, moving, and instructive one. It is a story of passion, of wrongdoing, and of love ultimately overcoming anger. Between the lines of the story, the Midrash finds a number of subtle lessons for us. Lessons about the way we confront the sins that are committed against us. Lessons about the way we confront the sins that are committed by us. Certainly, the story of Joseph and his brothers can provide us with important food for thought as we confront it each year in the annual Torah reading cycle. But the real point of the story is not simply to provide us with food for thought. The real challenge of our Torah portion is to really learn these lessons and to strive to apply them in our own lives. Shabbat Shalom.